Part 1. The house that was supposed to be mine. The day we buried my parents, it rained like the sky was trying to wash our family away. I stood beside my older sister, Vanessa, under a black umbrella that shook in my hands. Not because of the cold, but because I still couldn't believe they were gone. 1 week earlier, my mother had been calling me to remind me to eat something besides coffee and toast. My father had been laughing over the phone, telling me he had fixed the porch light, even though no one asked him to. Now they were both in the ground. Vanessa didn't cry much. She dabbed at the corner of her eye with a tissue, but her mascara stayed perfect. Her black dress hugged her body like she had chosen it for a business meeting instead of a funeral. She had always been like that. Polished, controlled, impossible to read. I told myself people grieved differently. I told myself that because she was all I had left. After the service, everyone came back to our parents' house. People filled the kitchen with casseroles, whispered condolences and stories about how wonderful Mom and Dad had been. I moved through the rooms like a ghost, touching the walls, the framed pictures, the furniture my parents had saved for years to buy. This house was supposed to feel safe. Instead, it felt like a museum of everything I had lost. Vanessa stood in the living room accepting hugs like she was hosting an event. Every time someone told her how strong she was, she smiled softly and said, "I have to be. For Olivia." For me. I wanted to believe that. A week later, the sympathy calls stopped. The food stopped coming. The house went quiet. That was when Vanessa asked me to meet her at the dining room table. She had a folder in front of her. I remember that folder clearly. Cream-coloured, neat, expensive-looking. Vanessa always loved things that looked important. "What's that?" I asked, sitting across from her. She sighed like she had been carrying the weight of the world alone. "It's about Mom and Dad's estate." The word estate felt strange. My parents weren't rich, but they had worked hard. They owned the house outright, had savings, investments, and a few rental properties my father had picked up over the years. He always said they were for both of us. "For my girls," he used to say. Vanessa slid a paper toward me. I looked down and saw legal words that blurred together. "What is this?" "It's their will," she said. My stomach tightened. "I thought we were meeting with their attorney together." "We don't need to." Her voice was smooth. Too smooth. "Everything is already clear." I read the paper once, then again, then a third time, because my brain refused to accept what my eyes were seeing. According to the document, my parents had left everything to Vanessa. The house, the savings, the rentals, the accounts, everything. My name was there only once. "Olivia will receive personal belongings of sentimental value at the discretion of Vanessa." At the discretion of Vanessa. I looked up slowly. "This isn't right." Vanessa folded her hands on the table. "I know it's hard." "No," my voice cracked. "This isn't hard. This is wrong." Her face changed then. Not much, but enough. The softness disappeared from her eyes. "Olivia, Mom and Dad knew you weren't responsible with money." I stared at her. "What?" "They worried about you," she said. "You were always emotional, always jumping from one idea to the next. Dad didn't think you were ready to handle anything this serious." "That is a lie." Vanessa leaned back. "I'm not going to argue with you." My hands started shaking. Dad told me the rentals were for both of us. Mom told me the house would always be home for both of us. "People say things," Vanessa said. "That doesn't make them legal." I stood up so fast the chair scraped against the floor. "I want to talk to the attorney." "You can," she said, "but it won't change anything." Something in the way she said it made my skin go cold. Over the next few days, I called everyone I could think of. My parents' old lawyer had retired 2 years before. The new attorney Vanessa gave me barely answered my questions. He said the documents were signed, witnessed, and valid. Valid. That word haunted me. I searched my parents' desk, their filing cabinet, the safe in their closet. Anything that might prove the paper Vanessa had shown me was fake, but everything was gone. Bank statements, property records, insurance papers. Gone. When I confronted Vanessa, she acted offended. "You're making this ugly," she said. "You made it ugly when you stole from me." Her eyes narrowed. "Be careful, Olivia." It was the first honest thing she had said to me. 2 weeks later, she told me I had to leave the house. I laughed at first because I thought she was joking. She wasn't. "I'm selling it," she said, standing in the doorway of my childhood bedroom. My clothes were still in the drawers. My mother's quilt was still folded at the end of the bed. A picture of me and Dad at my high school graduation still sat on the nightstand. "You can't sell our home," I whispered. "It's my home now." The words hit harder than any slap could have. I had nowhere to go. I had spent most of my savings helping with funeral expenses, thinking Vanessa and I were handling everything together. I had trusted her because she was my sister. That was my mistake. 3 days later, I packed my life into 2 suitcases and 1 cardboard box. Vanessa watched from the porch. She didn't help. She didn't apologize. She just stood there with her arms crossed, wearing my mother's pearl earrings. That was the moment something inside me changed. Not broke. Changed. I stopped crying as I put the last box in my car. I stopped begging. I stopped asking why. Vanessa had not only stolen my inheritance, she had stolen my home, my memories, and the last pieces of my parents she could get her hands on. As I opened the driver's side door, she called out, "You'll thank me one day. This might finally force you to grow up." I turned and looked at her. For the first time, I saw her clearly, not as my big sister, not as the person who was supposed to protect me, but as a thief wearing grief like perfume. I didn't yell. I didn't curse. I didn't give her the satisfaction of seeing me fall apart. I just said, "One day, Vanessa, you're going to sit across from me and realize you should have left me with something." She smiled like I was nothing. Then she went back inside and closed the door. I drove until the house disappeared from my rearview mirror. By sunset, I was crossing state lines with no plan, no family, and less than $400 to my name. But I had something Vanessa had underestimated. I had my father's stubbornness, my mother's patience, and a kind of anger that didn't burn fast. It burned slow, and slow fires destroy everything. Part 2. Building from nothing. The first night in the new state, I slept in my car. I parked behind a 24-hour grocery store because the lights made me feel safer. My neck ached from trying to get comfortable, and every sound outside made me jump awake. I remember staring through the windshield at 3 in the morning and wondering how my life had fallen apart so quickly. A month earlier, I had a family, a home, a future. Now I had less than $400 and nowhere to go. I could have called Vanessa. That was the crazy part. If I had apologized, if I had admitted she was right and I was wrong, she probably would have let me come back. But I knew the truth. The moment I walked back through that door, she would own me. And I would rather sleep in a car than spend another day begging someone who had stolen from me. The next morning I found a cheap motel on the edge of town. The room smelled like old cigarettes and cleaning chemicals, but it had a bed and a shower. That was enough. For the first few weeks, survival became my full-time job. I worked anywhere that would hire me. A coffee shop in the mornings, a restaurant at night. On weekends, I cleaned vacation rentals. I was exhausted constantly. There were nights I fell asleep fully dressed because I didn't have the energy to change clothes. But every paycheck felt like a tiny victory. For the first time in my life, nobody was coming to save me. And somehow that realization made me stronger. One afternoon, while cleaning a rental property, I noticed something. The owner had bought the house in terrible condition. The kitchen was outdated, the floors were damaged, the landscaping looked abandoned. Yet the property was worth nearly twice what he had paid for it. I spent the entire evening researching real estate. Then the next evening, and the next. I became obsessed. Every free minute went into learning. Property values, renovation costs, construction, market trends, investment strategies. I watched videos while eating dinner, listened to podcasts during work, read books from the library until they closed. The more I learned, the more fascinated I became. Real estate wasn't just about buildings. It was about potential, seeing value where nobody else could. That idea stayed with me because I knew exactly what it felt like to be overlooked. A year later, I had saved enough money for a tiny down payment on a rundown duplex. Most people thought I was insane. The roof leaked, the plumbing barely worked, the walls looked like they hadn't been painted in decades. But I saw possibilities. I spent every spare hour renovating it myself. I watched tutorials online and learned everything I could. By the time I finished, the property looked completely different. When I rented both units, I almost cried looking at the numbers. For the first time, money wasn't disappearing as fast as I earned it. It was growing, slowly, steadily, the same way a seed becomes a tree. Over the next few years, I repeated the process. One property became 3, 3 became 7, 7 became 15. People started calling me successful. They had no idea what those years actually looked like. The sacrifices, the sleepless nights, the panic attacks every time a deal almost collapsed. The fear that one mistake could send me right back to that motel room. But I kept going, because every success felt like proof that Vanessa had been wrong about me. I wasn't irresponsible, I wasn't incapable, I wasn't weak. I had simply been underestimated. 5 years after leaving home, I founded my own development company. The day I signed the paperwork, I sat alone in my office and stared at the company logo on the wall. Then I thought about my parents. I wish they could see it. I wish they knew I hadn't given up, that I had survived. Some days I still thought about Vanessa, not because I missed her, because I wanted answers. I had hired attorneys years earlier to investigate the inheritance documents. Every lead hit a dead end. The signatures appeared legitimate, the witnesses checked out. Nothing could be proven. The legal trail was cold, and eventually I stopped looking. At least that's what I told myself. The truth was different. I never stopped wondering, never stopped remembering, never stopped carrying that anger. It just became quieter, like background noise, something that existed without controlling me. One afternoon, nearly 8 years after I left home, my assistant entered my office carrying a stack of files. "Potential acquisitions," she said. I glanced through them absent-mindedly. Retail properties, apartment complexes, commercial developments. Then one file caught my attention. Not because of the property, because of the company name. Hartwell Enterprises. My stomach tightened instantly. Hartwell. Vanessa's married name. I stared at the page. The company was struggling financially. Revenue had dropped dramatically. Debt was increasing. Several properties were being liquidated to avoid bankruptcy. I leaned back in my chair. After all these years, there she was. The universe had quietly placed her name back into my life. My assistant frowned. "Something wrong?" I closed the file. No, but my heart was beating faster than it had in years. That night, curiosity got the better of me. I searched public records, business reports, financial statements, everything I could find. The picture became clear quickly. Vanessa had inherited everything: the house, the rentals, the investments, every dollar my parents left behind. And somehow she had managed to turn all of it into a disaster. Bad investments, poor partnerships, lavish spending, lawsuits, debt. The empire she stole was collapsing. I should have felt satisfied. Instead, I felt strangely calm, because for the first time I realized something important. I didn't need revenge anymore. Life had already begun collecting its debt. The next morning I arrived at the office and reviewed the acquisition file again. The property was valuable. The location was perfect. The numbers made sense. It was a smart business move, nothing more, nothing less. I signed the approval paperwork, then slid the file across my desk. "Proceed with the purchase." As my assistant walked away, neither of us knew one small detail. The owner desperately trying to sell that property had no idea who the buyer was. And Vanessa Hartwell was about to discover exactly what happens when the person you destroy refuses to stay broken. Part 3. The Closing Table. The closing meeting was scheduled for a Thursday morning. To everyone else, it was just another commercial property acquisition. To me, it felt like fate finally arriving for an appointment. I spent most of the week debating whether I should attend in person. Normally, my attorneys handled closings without me. My schedule was packed with development projects, investor meetings, and construction site visits. There was no practical reason for me to be there. But this wasn't practical. This was personal. 8 years of unanswered questions sat behind a single name: Vanessa Hartwell. By Thursday morning, I had made my decision. I was going. The conference room occupied the top floor of a downtown law office. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the city skyline, and a long, polished table stretched through the center of the room. I arrived early. My attorney Daniel glanced at me curiously. "You usually skip these." "I know," he shrugged. "Your company is getting a good deal." I almost laughed. If only he knew. 10 minutes later, the door opened. I recognized Vanessa instantly. Time had changed her, but not in the way I expected. The confident woman who had stood on my parents' porch all those years ago looked exhausted. The expensive clothes were still there, the designer handbag, the jewelry, but they couldn't hide the strain on her face. The dark circles under her eyes, the tension in her shoulders, the constant nervous movement of her hands. For a second, she didn't recognize me. Her attention stayed focused on the attorneys and paperwork. Then her eyes landed on mine. Everything stopped. The color drained from her face. Her mouth opened slightly. "Olivia?" The room went silent. I simply smiled. "Hello, Vanessa." She stared at me as if she'd seen a ghost. For a moment, I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. "You?" she whispered. I could practically see the confusion racing through her mind. The last time she saw me, I was loading cardboard boxes into a beat-up car. Homeless, broken, alone. The woman sitting across from her now was none of those things. Daniel glanced between us. "You two know each other?" Vanessa didn't answer. I did. "She's my sister." The attorneys exchanged surprised looks. Vanessa finally found her voice. "What are you doing here?" I folded my hands calmly. "My company is purchasing the property." The silence that followed felt enormous. Her eyes darted to the paperwork, then to the company logo on the folder. Then back to me. Recognition hit her all at once. "No." I could almost hear the pieces falling into place inside her head. The buyer, the company, the developer, me. "No," she repeated. "Yes." The meeting continued because business doesn't stop for family drama. The attorneys reviewed documents. Signatures were requested. Terms were confirmed, but Vanessa barely heard any of it. She kept staring at me. Eventually, during a break in the discussion, she leaned forward. "You own this company?" "I do." Her face tightened. "How?" The question almost made me laugh. Not because it was funny, because after everything she had done, that was what she wanted to know. "How?" I met her gaze. "The same way Dad built his rental properties." Her eyes flickered. I continued. "One investment at a time." For the first time, she looked genuinely uncomfortable. The attorneys returned to discussing paperwork. Vanessa signed where she was instructed. Every signature transferred another piece of her struggling business into my control. The irony was almost unbelievable. Years ago, she had taken everything from me with the stroke of a pen. Now she was handing something back the exact same way. Except this time, it was legal. And deserved. When the final document was signed, the lead attorney smiled. "Congratulations, the transaction is complete." Just like that, it was over. Vanessa remained seated while everyone else began gathering papers. Finally, she looked at me. "I didn't know." I studied her carefully. For years, I had imagined this moment. The anger, the confrontation, the satisfaction. But standing there now, I felt something different. Peace. Because I realized I no longer needed anything from her. Not an apology. Not an explanation. Not revenge. Nothing. "You should have left me with something," I said quietly. Her eyes widened. She remembered. The last thing I had said before driving away. The warning she had laughed at. A tear slipped down her cheek. I made mistakes. I nodded. You did. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then she asked the question I never expected. Did Mom and Dad really mean to leave things to both of us? The guilt in her voice told me everything. She already knew the answer. Maybe she had always known. I stood and picked up my briefcase. I think that's something you'll have to live with. Then I turned and walked toward the door. Behind me, Vanessa remained frozen in her chair. For the first time in nearly a decade, I wasn't carrying the weight of what she had done. I was leaving it behind. And as the elevator doors closed, I realized something else. The story wasn't ending with her downfall. It was beginning with my freedom. Part 4. What was really mine? 3 weeks after the closing meeting, I received a phone call I wasn't expecting. It was from an attorney back in my hometown. At first, I almost ignored it. I hadn't lived there in nearly a decade, but something made me answer. Ms. Carter? The man asked. Speaking. My name is Robert Jenkins. I recently acquired some archived files from a retiring estate attorney. Your parents' names appeared in one of the records. I sat up straighter. My parents? Yes. I believe there's information you may want to see. 2 days later, I was on a plane. For the first time in 8 years, I returned home. The town looked smaller than I remembered. The roads, the stores, the neighborhoods. Everything felt frozen in time, everything except me. The attorney's office occupied a small brick building near downtown. Robert greeted me and led me into a conference room. A thick file sat on the table. What exactly is this? I asked. He opened the folder carefully. Several years before your parents passed away, they created an estate plan with another attorney. When that attorney retired, portions of the records were misplaced. My heart began pounding. Robert slid a document toward me. I stared at it, then I stared harder, because I knew exactly what I was looking at. My parents' original will, not the version Vanessa had shown me. The real one. My hands shook as I read. The estate was divided equally, 50% to Vanessa, 50% to me. Exactly as my parents had always promised. Tears blurred my vision. For years I had questioned myself, questioned my memories, wondered if maybe grief had distorted what I thought I knew. But here it was. Proof. My parents hadn't abandoned me. They hadn't chosen one daughter over the other. They had loved us equally. Robert cleared his throat. There is more. He handed me another document. A letter. Addressed to both daughters. The paper was yellowed with age. I recognized my mother's handwriting immediately. Dear Vanessa and Olivia, if you're reading this, then your father and I are gone. First, know this. We love you both more than anything we have ever built, earned, or owned. Nothing we leave behind is more important than the two of you. The tears came instantly. I continued reading. Money can be replaced, property can be rebuilt. But family cannot. Take care of each other when we're gone, because one day all you'll have left are your memories and each other. I couldn't finish the rest. I covered my mouth as sobs escaped my chest. For years I had carried anger, hurt, betrayal. Now I felt grief all over again. Not because of what Vanessa stole, but because of what she destroyed. My parents had spent their lives trying to build a family, and greed had shattered it. After leaving the attorney's office, I drove to the cemetery. The sky was clear this time. No rain, no storms, just sunlight. I stood between my parents' graves and read the letter again. Then I sat down in the grass. For a long time, I simply talked to them. About the business, about the properties, about the years they had missed, about how much I wished they could see everything. Eventually, I smiled. Because I realized something. The inheritance had never been the most valuable thing they left me. Not even close. Vanessa inherited the money. I inherited the lessons. Dad's work ethic, Mum's kindness, their resilience, their belief that hard work eventually matters. Those things had built my life, not their bank account. A week later, I received another surprise. Vanessa called. I hadn't heard her voice since the closing meeting. I almost didn't answer, but I did. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Then she said, "I found out about the original will." I closed my eyes. Of course she had. The attorney had likely contacted her too. "I know." Her voice cracked. "I'm sorry." 3 simple words. Words I had waited years to hear. But strangely, they didn't feel important anymore. She continued, "I was jealous of you." I frowned. "Jealous? You were always their favorite." I almost laughed. The statement was so absurd it barely made sense. "We both know that's not true." "I believed it," she whispered. For the first time I heard genuine regret. Not regret for getting caught. Regret for becoming the person she had become. I spent years convincing myself I deserved everything. Her breathing shook. And now I have almost nothing left. I looked out my office window. The city stretched beneath me. Buildings, projects, dreams turned into reality. Everything I had built, not because I stole it, because I earned it. "Vanessa," I said softly, "having everything didn't ruin your life." She was quiet. "You thinking you deserved everything did." The silence that followed felt honest. Painful, but honest. Eventually she whispered, "Can you forgive me?" I thought about that question for a long time. Then I answered truthfully, "Yes, not for her, for me." Because forgiveness wasn't about pretending it never happened. It was about refusing to carry it forever. A year later, my company completed the largest development project in its history. At the ribbon-cutting ceremony, reporters asked how I had built such a successful business. I smiled. Then I thought about the girl sleeping in her car behind a grocery store. The girl who lost everything, the girl everyone underestimated. "I started with almost nothing," I told them, "and that taught me something important." "What?" I looked toward the crowd. "Nobody can steal what you've learned. Nobody can steal your character. Nobody can steal your determination." The cameras flashed. The crowd applauded. And somewhere deep inside, I felt at peace, because my sister had stolen my inheritance, but she never stole my future. And in the end, that turned out to be worth far more.